Again, get the most bang for your buck. It takes a while to write a grant application, no matter what it is, because you're putting together lots of different pieces of information. So, do what's going to be best for you long term.
And Focus 990s, you can see those in Foundation Directory, so if you're able to get into that database at your library. And then they're also available online through, I think, ProPublica, because they are public tax documents. So they might be a little on the older side. You might not be able to get sort of like their most recent ones, but usually if you're able to look at a few years' worth, even if they're a little bit older, it'll give you a pretty good picture of Thanksgiving history. Another consideration is cash versus in-kind gifts. So is someone cutting you a check that then you can spend, or is someone sending you the instruments themselves, kind of knowing what your needs there are, so that you're aligned with what the funder is interested in doing. And then finally, leveraging your network and connections. The best way to get a grant is to have a warm introduction to the person that or the organization that you're applying to. And so ask around your community, ask around your school, like Krista was saying, and see if there's anyone who has a connection somewhere where you can sit down, have a conversation, or send an email to say, hey, this is what I'm thinking of doing. Does that seem like it's in line with your philanthropic goals? Because that will take you a lot farther sometimes than just a cold application. So, now that we kind of understand eligibility and alignment, let's come up with kind of a quick project. So, like, what is something that keep up simple guidelines? Right. So we're gonna take a look at some sample guidelines to kind of see what is out there in terms of grants. And so let's have just a sample project that will kind of run through these guidelines with our super squeaky expo markers. Yes.
Expensive things like new risers or sound equipment, speakers, mixers, microphones.
Yeah, dream big. Like, give us all of them.
Yeah.
Paying for salary for after school, just after school teach.
Classroom set of that DJ thing. DJ classroom set.
We love that, right?
So these are things that I've pulled almost word for word from some different grant sources. So when Krista was saying before, looking at local corporations, a lot of time local banks will have some really great charitable foundations that they're kind of running, where a client will come to them to be like, hey, I want you to manage like a small foundation for me. And so this is pulled from one of those. So look at things like Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Capital One, and look at their philanthropic services. And they usually have some pretty good kind of search engine styles where you can filter by your region, filter by priorities, and they very kindly will usually put their average giving right on that kind of homepage for you, so you don't have to go digging for the 990s. So let's take a moment to look at this sample guideline. So we see our requirements. You have to be a 501c3 nonprofit, and a lot of your schools are 501c3s, or like a booster program would be a 501c3 registered. So
I do want to say be careful with the 501c3 thing, because like schools are 501c3s. However, some funders will like say 501c3 and then you look further down, it's like we do not give to individual schools, or we do not give into individual districts. So just be careful with that, because sometimes funders will think of like schools as a separate thing, even though it's they're all technically 501c3s.
But also
through the PTOs.
yes.
Do you know? Oh, yeah, that's kind of a weezy question. For New York City specifically, like, is each school a 501c3, or is the whole district a 501c3?
I believe each school is, and then I think the district has its own thing as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's something I would check with your administrator on, because they might be better versed in that than.
Of course, yeah.
I was just gonna add in just a little piece of knowledge too. For every, requirements list that is asking for the 501c3, I think when it comes to teacher grants specifically, there's a lot that are very clear that they're like, we are here for educators to give things directly to teachers. So it is important to look for this, but on your end of things, it sometimes is a little easier because they tend to spell it out more clearly.
So for the sake of kind of working through this exercise, let's say that this 501c3 includes schools. And then next requirement, any organization that's received a grant 3 years in a row won't be eligible. We're applying for our first time, so cool. So based on these requirements, we're feeling good, we're like, cool, I think we can apply for this. So now that we know we've met the requirements, the next step is, are we aligned? Should we apply? So if they say they want to provide scholarships to music students to complete music education for organizations presenting orchestral music, no geographic restrictions, but they usually give in the New York, New Jersey area. And then their gifts look like they're pretty big, $10,000 to $50,000, 26 gifts a year. So taking a look at some of those priorities, let's take a look at some of those projects that we're looking at funding. So do we feel based on which of these projects, based on this funder alignment, do we think kind of stands the best chance of receiving funding based on their interest in scholarships, in orchestral music? And for the sake of argument, everyone here is from New York and New Jersey. Welcome to the music room.
I feel like probably doing the DJ audio equipment, but with a mixture of it being an after-school program, could be a grant light, or could you win in the grants?
Yeah.
And you could write it as grant.
Transportation, I feel, would be more important, because you got to get them to those competitions and those concerts.
Yep, I think that would be a really good one, especially with their focus on orchestral music. That might be something where the DJ one might need to be a little bit more of a stretch based on their focus on orchestral, but something like, hey, we want to get these students to, you know, a performance, an orchestra performance, something like the risers could be helpful too, after school, but kind of keeping that like orchestra focused.
But I think if you do want to consider the DJ one as part of it too, you have to make sure you bring it back to what's their priority. So if
Gotcha.
maybe you have a really structured orchestra program already and you're trying to branch out into more modern music and you're trying to find a way to combine all of this, spell that out for them, and that's going to help you stand a better chance when their priority is specifically that.
Exactly. So always kind of trying to bring things back to the funder's priorities. So then let's take a look at another.
Sorry, question in the back there.
Yes, yes.
As you look at the grant making priorities, you know, the first one says provide scholarships, okay, and the second one is support organizations. Do you read those together, or do you read those as separate?
I think for something like that, I would read those as separate. Usually, you know, they'll have a couple kind of bullet points, unless they, you know, there's a funder that we work with in New Jersey who's like, you know, our top priority is early childhood education, but we also support music education. Usually they'll kind of make that very clear, and you can see that in their funding history as well. So if you're taking a look at 990s and information like that, and you know it's really focused on, hey, there are all of these scholarships, and there's maybe like a few things that look like they're for a school, then that's something else for you to take into consideration as you're deciding if that's something that you want to apply for.
If the amount was like 10,000 to 50,000 for this, like this one, would you assume that it's more competitive? And like, if it's like less than 10,000, it's less competitive, or do you just go for it anyway, no matter what? Like,
Yeah, I think less about the grant amount and more about the number of grants that they give out. Because there could be a funder who has just like a wealth of reserves that they're looking to distribute. And so a $10,000 grant might not be a huge grant for them. And so I would say like 26 grants per year feels on the lower side. But again, it kind of depends on like how local an organization is or something. Like if they're only giving to their specific county, 26 grants feels doable. If they're a national organization and they're only giving 26 grants, that feels like that could be super competitive. So kind of weighing the size or the scope of the foundation against kind of the number of grants, I think will give you a better sense of the competition compared to the average grant size. Now that said, I think I like, as you're putting together your project and your budget, looking at, you know, falling within that average grant range is the best thing to do especially as someone who would be coming to them for the first time. You know, I don't know if they say, you know, 10 to 50,000 is the average. Go in at least 10 and try to build a project that would include expenses that include that. On the flip side, you know, if they say 10 to 50,000, don't come in at 100,000 because that's much less likely to be funded. So try to stick in that average range if that's something that you can find. Any more questions on this one? Sorry. Yes, no, you're good.
Would you apply if your project was $2,000?
I might, but I would probably try to exhaust other options first. So I think I would try to identify folks that might be a better fit. And then if this is the only one that I could find that I thought would be a good fit, I would maybe start with like a warm introduction first. I think in general though, it's better to come in at a lower amount. So I think you're more likely to be funded at a $2,000 grant against a $10,000 average than, you know, a $20,000 grant at a $10,000 average. So, yeah.
Or just dream bigger.
It's kind of like, I think of it like job applications a little bit, right? Like when you see a job application, you're gonna hit, hopefully, you know, your qualifications hit most of those things that they're asking for. And it's kind of that same idea. Like if there is a better fit for it, that's probably a better chance. So I think what you said was great in terms of what would you do if it's only 2,000.
Sorry, one more
Yeah.
question along those lines too. If like, say you went in at 15, but they're only willing to give you 10, would they come back and be like, we can do this but only for 10?
Yes,
Yes,
that happens
definitely.
all the time.
Okay.
Often, sometimes in a grant application, one of the questions will be, if we aren't able to come in at the full amount, how would that affect your project? We get asked that on, I would say, almost every grant that we
Don't say, no, I can't use it.
Right.
I must have.
Anything's better than zero, right? So.
we will figure it out. Cool, so let's take a look at a different funder. Those guidelines and restrictions. Organizations can only apply and are awarded once per year. Grants are for instruments and gear only. So this is not going to be a grant that we're asking for cash. Music instruction, that is part of a 501c3 or a public school. That's all feeling good. They clarify kind of what they mean as a music instruction program. So has to be actively making music, not necessarily music appreciation, or you know, music like going to see a performance. The students have to be making music. And then they kind of break down their funding categories. So in-school music programs, after-school music programs, community programs, music therapy. So let's take a look at this kind of in the context of some of the programs that we have put together.
We're getting some goods this time.
So this feels like a great, when they say, you know, instruments and gear, that DJ and audio equipment, that's going to be a great fit for this project.
Rising technically here too.
Rising
Yeah.
gear too, yeah. After school could be a fit, but it's because it's an instrument or gear grant, it's in-kind gifts. We wouldn't be able to pay for like that after-school salary or stipend.
And you'd have to be careful because the bottom is after school that are not
Yeah,
run
also
by the
that,
school.
yeah.
So if you're running it through your school, not really a great one for you.
So these are sort of the negotiations that you're doing as a grant writer, working through finding your grants. So step one is finding the grant, and then step two is kind of knowing your funder, and then deciding, is this a grant that I, A, can apply to, and B, feel like I have a good return on investment. If I'm going to put the time into this, do I feel like I stand a strong chance of getting this funding? Any questions on this one? Oh, all right.
Oh, thank you.
Before you go on.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure.
I'm with, I'm a member of the Rotary Club. I've been a lieutenant.
Oh, yeah,
governor,
amazing.
so-
Wonderful.
And our Rotary Club usually does grants in the area of 500 to 1,000. And once sometimes you get in there, they'll put you on a yearly thing. So, I mean, you might not get 20,000 right off, but
Yeah.
in 20 years you'll have.
So where are you located? Because they're trying to get some money.
In Mexico.
Every state has Rotary clubs. But it's not just Rotary clubs. You can do Elks, Moose, American Legion, Kiwanis, they all, they're, service clubs, and they're interested in doing things for their community. And a lot of them will support music. I was also the director of New Horizons Band. Since I was in Rotary, I was able to get them to give the band $500 every year.
Yeah.
And then one year we needed a xylo, and they gave us $1,500 for that.
It's amazing.
So that if you're looking for something not huge and big, like 20,000 or something, you can check with your local, like I said, service clubs in your community. And then there's one other area that you can hit, but it's kind of tricky because you got to get your district's permission, and that is capital outlay requests from the state government. And it's usually state representatives and state senators that have access to those funds. In our state, I think each state rep gets about $100,000 to dole out to their constituency. And I was able to get $30,000 one year for my mariachi group, which covered uniforms, music, and instruments. And then the next year, she was able to give me $27,000, which I used to buy my marching band percussion, because it was getting bored, so I needed a new set. And then what I had left, I bought like 11 computers and loaded it with music software for music theory.
Amazing.
So
Capital out of what?
capital outlay requests.
Capital
That
outlay.
would be from your state representatives or your state senators.
If you want to just throw that up on the board, Alyssa, maybe that'll help so folks can
And,
copy that down and.
And every state is different, of course. Some states have a couple more bucks. So,
For sure.
Their state reps might have access to more money. And they will all, state senators and state reps will try to do things for communities because they know if it gets out that they helped out, that means more voters for the next election. So,
Well, thank you so much. We totally appreciate that extra advice. We're gonna keep it moving here because we're gonna actually design our own grant together. So take it away, Alyssa.
Yeah, so you may look at a grant application sometimes and be like, oh, like you may feel like you are in a classroom filled with mathematical equations that you don't know how to solve, and it looks very intimidating. So this is kind of the part of things where we're trying to break down what the certain sections are and like how to go about answering those. And we're going to use some of our ideas and kind of flesh those out for a grant application. So not every grant's gonna look the same, like they're gonna ask different questions depending on the funder or phrase things differently, but these are like the main things that are gonna be in a grant. And one of the links that you're gonna get as well as a handout in a second kind of has these different things for brainstorming, so you can use this if you are brainstorming a grant. Sometimes it's easier to like just kind of outline the sections first, know what you're gonna say, and then actually start writing. So a lot of times you'll get an executive summary, so that short, like 1 to 2 sentence, like elevator pitch of like, this is what I want, this is how much I need, this is why I want it, all in 1 or 2 sentences. Then you go into a more detailed project description. You talk about the people that you're benefiting, so your students, or if it's a professional development project, maybe it's for yourself or other teachers as well. Statement of need is huge. We're going to talk about that in a minute, but just like why you need that money or those instruments or whatever it is. How you're going to evaluate. It's kind of like a lesson plan, honestly, of like what are the measurable objectives. But that's like that is what funders really look for. It's like, can you make a SMART goal, like basically for that kind of thing. And then sometimes there are attachments, which might include like a budget. Letters of support, like something like a letter from the principal kind of can go a long way of saying like, yes, we're invested in this and we're excited about the possibility that this could happen. So
Can I add one more thing
Yeah,
onto
go
this?
for it.
So oftentimes when you're seeing all these things and the asks that they want from you, they are coming with very strict, like detailed things that they need. So attachments, for example, they might say, give us everything in a PDF. It's not optional, you know, like, so they say they want a PDF and you send them something you built in Google Slides and you decided you didn't want to, you know, export it and transfer to that file type. Some people, I'm sure, just toss that application directly in the trash. Another huge thing is going to be character counts. You might, character counts or word counts, so be specific and know the difference. But oftentimes, you know, you come across a project description and they might say, okay, give us a project description in 1,000 characters. So you have to stick to that. It's not an optional thing. You know, if you want to be long-winded and keep talking about whatever it is, that's great, but that funder really might not care. And again, they may throw your application because of something simple like that. So follow their specific guidelines.
Don't they also sometimes at the end of your project might request a breakdown on
I think you're one step ahead of us, so I promise we're gonna get there.
Yeah, definitely. So the executive summary is that, you know, that big elevator picture I was talking about. We're actually going to come back to this because we're gonna do this like we're writing it and write down some things on our whiteboard. But so typically you're just including your title, your amount, your description, and the number one priority of the project. Like I think sometimes when you're asking for things, you can think of a million reasons why you need it and how it's going to help your kids, but like focus on one thing in this section. And tip, while this section is often the first part of an application, it's what they want to see on the cover page, it's usually easier to write it last. So we're skipping it for right now. We'll come back. Okay, so I think kind of the easiest way to start is just how we did it over there is like, what's the scope of our project? Like, what are we asking for? Because usually that's where a grant idea comes from. It's like, oh, I need this, right? So thinking about it in this document that you're gonna get in a little bit, just like, what are the things that I want? What's the quantity that I would need? Like, whatever it is that you need is basically the scope. And so you would very clearly define that before you even start writing, because if it changes while you're writing, it's okay. Like it can happen, but you have to be careful that you're going back and making things consistent. So it's better to kind of flesh things out first. Like I was talking about, you will be setting goals. Most applications will say, what are the goals of this project? So what are the results of being able to purchase the above items or carry out the above activities? So you can talk about like what changes you want to see in your students or in your teaching or whatever it is, and use these descriptions to design like a few measurable goals for a project. So let's come up with, first of all, let's like clearly define what our pretend, this is like a Mad Libs project, of like what is our pretend project for our pretend school. Oh, and if anyone has a pretend school name, start thinking about that, because that's
Can we
good.
add musical instruments to that list?
Instruments? So can we like pretend that our project is going with those sample guidelines like 2, where they were asking about like year and what was it? Year and instruments. So what do we want to include in that request?
Cables.
Cables?
Instrument storage.
That's a great one.
Large percussion equipment,
Yeah,
so should we kill transportation and after-school funding?
Yeah.
probably.
RIP.
Yeah, I like how we're getting a little smaller in the thought process too. Like sometimes it's easy to jump in and be like, give me those big items. But I mean, I've written grants for super tiny things before, like as specific as like books for my classroom, like specific book titles. I wanted all these children's literature books. So it's not always about go big or go home. What are small, meaningful items that would work for you that might go along with some of these things as well? Like you could be saying, I just need more strings for string repair, or I need guitar tuners, I need a bunch of picks because my kids lose them every day.
So if we're asking for these things, like if this is like what we're asking for, why are we asking for them? So what's the goal with this? You want to have an idea of how you would explain it to someone.
Does a limited school budget.
Okay, so one reason could be to supplement the budget that you have,
To provide access.
provide access,
We just talked about
Just-
hitting standards.
standards. Yeah,
Provide access to students.
give it just a minute. And then I saw a hand back there too. Yes.
Well, luckily, after COVID, I've seen like, since people were shut down so much, they like want to do all the things now.
Yeah.
So it's like almost an influx in a program. So just expanding programs.
Yeah.
Or program expansion.
That's
Yeah.
like a great thing for funders to hear too. Like, this is what, I think a lot of times we focus on what is difficult, but like, hearing something like cool, but like, I'm being really successful, but I need help to
Yeah.
keep going. Yes.
Need assessments.
Mhm.
You know, and some of you may have seen from COVID too, some of those ESSER funds, maybe your building was kind enough to get you something through ESSER funding, but maybe that caused you to in turn need something else for storage or what have you, so, yeah, expansion's a great thought.
You want high quality materials.
Expansion.
Yeah.
Or would that be like a, you know, it's a good thing that's like to repair, not to repair, it's like to repair a program in COVID. Like as a choir teacher, it's like our numbers were decimated in COVID.
Yeah.
And we're still building them back up, but we need stuff. So would that be something that you would put in the grant to not only expand, but like
Yeah.
to like repair?
Especially like, and we're gonna get to data in a second, but especially if it's like, my program shrunk by 50% or
Yeah,
something.
yeah.
Saying like, we've had success with this in the past, we just need to get past like these challenges, I think is good. Yes,
It's high quality material for the kids.
yes.
I think these are all great.
Yeah, let's do one more and then.
I just think something about bringing in the community so that, like, especially the grant giver, is there a word? I don't know. They want to see
Get it in a grant maker.
they want to see that maybe expand outside of students and just like bleed out into the community.
Yeah. Cool. So those are all a lot of really great reasons. Typically, you're not going to throw that all in this section because that's a lot. Like, you might pick 2 to 4 things and say, or combine things because some of these are related. Like high quality and standards could be like grouped together, and you're also going to make them measurable. So like, you might say, I want to expand my program by 20%, like in attendance or in numbers or whatever that measurement is. All right, I'm going to go on. So this is kind of a very powerful section, but also kind of an easy one because you get to talk about your students. If it's for your student, like in this case, this is primarily going to benefit your students. So you might talk about, they might want to know like what age, what grade are they in, how many people is this going to impact. A lot of times funders want to see that it's impacting a lot of kids. And luckily, as teachers, I guess we usually teach a lot of kids. So are they part of a specific group? Are they part of your modern band ensemble? Are they part of your general music class? They want to know specifically. And sometimes demographic info is helpful too, but only if it's relevant to your project or they ask for it. So my tip with that is like, focus on specific observable information about your beneficiaries that's relevant to the project, because if you just say like something very general, it can kind of, that really applies to your kids and may be true. It can also bring in like kind of almost like a microaggression toward other groups that are like that, and it can help you avoid making assumptions or judgments about the groups represented in the description. So if you want to say like, my students I think I have an example of that in a second, but just keep that in mind, that you're being very specific about your specific students, and not generalizing, just saying like, they're all like this, because there's a lot of differences even within communities that are very similar.
Yeah, and check and see if your district or your school is Title I also.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, definitely.
We're at 45 minutes, just to give
Okay,
you a...
perfect. So, what do we want to say this, let's, in our imaginary group, who's this benefiting? What kind of classes is this for?
Choir, orchestra, band, modern band.
I heard middle school.
I think we're gonna go with just one for this one, because we're gonna try to focus it down into one.
Yeah,
executive
well, let's
summary.
do like one.
Instrumental program?
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's fine.
Cool, because
Cool.
then you got an umbrella down.
Yeah.
This next section is probably the most important thing. It's your statement of need, and it actually overlaps a lot with that why section or like your goals too. So we might have to like kind of shift things over or whatever. But if you're doing that before you're writing, that's really good because then you're not going to like say things twice or like leave something out. So how does your plan align with the needs of the students that you just described? Is it going to build on strengths, like someone said? Is it going to build on an interest or maybe like a cultural background of your students? It's all, I think we're always tempted to describe the difficulties of like, this is really hard, and it is. So you can describe a problem or a gap and how this project addresses it, but also taking a moment to be like, but my kids bring this to the table, and like get a funder excited about that, and it's not always just about like, this is really bad and I need your help to fix it and that kind of thing. So just keep that in mind. And a good way to do that too is explain how the project aligns with your school or district's curricular goals if they have some kind of initiative on like social emotional learning or on like specific kinds of like project-based learning or something
I'll
like
say,
that.
just kind of to add to that and like a random idea, the school that I taught in primarily was it had a very large refugee population, probably about 50%. Akron, Ohio has a large nonprofit there, so we see a lot of refugee resettlement in the area. Amazing, amazing kids, but one of the grants that I wrote was specifically to bring in more multicultural resources for them. So I really kind of tried to, leverage that and, using research-based solutions, aligning with our curricular goals as a high ELL population building. It was a really easy way to bring that full circle and say to a funder, like, hey, let's get this for these kids.
Yeah. And so now we're going to talk a little bit about EBIT. I'm kind of going to keep going for the sake of time because we did talk about like why we want this, right? So you can decide like, here are my goals in the section that asks about goals, and then you can elaborate a little bit more in that statement of need where you're explaining like, I have my students, like my program has grown by 20% in the last year and I want to keep that momentum going or whatever that is. This is a little bit of what I was alluding to, because this can be a tricky, and like literally I could do a whole presentation just on this slide. We are not going there, we're just very dipping a toe into this water, but just want to like also say it's not about like, try to not frame your students as something you need to fix or like, you're not trying to fix the person. It's you're solving a problem, like here's the problem or here's the need, and it's not that you're like trying to change who they are as a person, like and their identity, but maybe you are trying to help them with this one specific thing in music class. So can you maybe just read these different examples, and anyone actually just read example one, and my question for you is, what are the implications or impact of the following statement? Can you see any things that are a little bit yucky or a little bit, anyone want to?
Less likely.
Less likely? Yeah, sometimes.
Impossible.
Yeah, because like, as a funder, do you want to tackle an impossible situation?
I don't know, it casts judgment or suspicion on.
Exactly.
the piece of
Yeah.
community.
And notice too, sorry, I'll let you keep going.
Anyway, it's just a very negative way of viewing
Yeah.
describing.
But like, has anyone seen language like this before and stuff?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And did anyone catch that I said urban communities
Yeah,
in
that's
the
what I was gonna
forward?
say.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't say like low economic status, and there's a definite microaggression there, right? Of like framing that as like they are less than, or it's just kind of yucky, right? Whereas if you can say that statement, why is that different, or why is that made? And maybe there's something in this statement too that I didn't catch, but like, how does reframe it? Well, like, what did I do to reframe that second one?
More specific.
More specific.
It's more positive for sure.
Positive at the front.
Positive at the
Student
front.
enthusiasm.
Data-driven.
Data-driven, yes.
Also, you're talking about what the families have said, as opposed to implying something on top of them.
Right, it's like very specifically, my students and my families have said
Yeah.
this. And this is a challenge for my, not like saying like, all urban kids have this problem. Like that's, yeah. I think you guys get the idea.
It's a hopeful statement too.
It is helpful, yeah, for sure, of like, hey, they want to do this, but it's hard. Like, I was in the rural affinity group earlier, and even though this is about urban settings, like we talked about transportation there, and like some districts are huge, and it's really hard to get people there. So that's just one example of how you can like kind of reframe, like you're kind of saying the same thing, but you can reframe it to be a little bit more positive, and also like just honoring your students' dignity, you know?
Let's talk about evaluation. I took that picture in the cafeteria the other day. Oh, I have one. I did not. That's actually a lie. But if you did that in the cafeteria, you're nasty. Don't put two things together. But in the scheme of grant evaluation, quantitative data and qualitative data is kind of a great way to think about it. So I also have a little quote before we get into the nitty-gritty, attributed to Albert Einstein, but honestly, who knows? Not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. So, you know, we see the impact of things on our students a lot, and sometimes, you know, whether you're being evaluated by your administrator and they're saying, give me data on this, I need the data, I need this. There's so many things in music and the arts that are so valuable that we can't always quantify. But when you're thinking about evaluating your grant and presenting that back to a funder to potentially get you some more money long term, you really have to sit down and consider both of them. So maybe, you know, we received funding from what we've been talking about, we got our project funded. Once you're at that point of having the money, it's already a great time to say, how am I going to evaluate the impact of this so I can start collecting data now, because you don't want to be stuck on the back end like, oh my gosh, now I need to get this data, I need to try to prove that this happened, or I need to try to get these survey results. So you can send us forward here. So quantitative data, quick overview, that's more the actual numbers, the nitty gritty. You can do pre and post assessment scores. I know that's scary to music teachers sometimes, I feel it. Maybe you're trying to up enrollment numbers, that's another great thing that funders would love to hear about. Maybe you had a bunch more performances that year because of what they gave to you. Maybe you were able to take a huge field trip you've never been able to do before. You can pull survey data. This could be from your students specifically, could be from families, could be from other stakeholders, maybe teachers in your building. Attendance, participation rates is really great. We all know some kids are at school for music. That might be what gets them in the classroom every day, and that might be what gets them there. So if you can use attendance data to quantify that, that's amazing. Or inventory data. Maybe you write a grant for a huge number of instruments and you can say, hey, I started with nothing, now I have all of this. Isn't that amazing? So qualitative data, on the flip side of that, I think is the one that's more, you know, things we love to hear about and the stuff that we observe in our class every day. So this can be things like observation notes, if you just want to jot down little, you know, those amazing moments that happen with your students or those amazing concert things that happen. Funders love to hear that. This can be interviews. You could pull a student and interview them. You can pull a parent, interview them. Maybe an administrator might want to give some feedback on how your program's positively impacted the building now that you have some of these other items that you've received. And you can
Like our
always
teacher testimonial.
yes,
Like, we
kind of a
use
teacher
that
testimonial for sure.
To, like show impact. So that's,
And you can always use direct quotes from people. So, you know, if a student comes up to you and says something really amazing, you want to put that in a direct quote and send it back to a funder. I'm sure they'd love to hear. Or summaries are good too. And student work samples. So if you get a video, you've got photos of students doing things, maybe they're writing compositions, you can send all those types of things in too to show, hey, here's what you gave me, here's what I'm doing with it, and here's how I've evaluated that process to show that I'm working towards those goals.
So next is budgets. So we kind of worked through our project narrative, and now we're starting to take a look at some of those attachments. So pretty much every grant will ask you, how much does this cost? So you want to be able to provide that big picture number and then also break it down for your funders. So be realistic and be specific. Don't, ask for $20,000 when you really need $2,000, because that's gonna kind of ruin your chances of getting a grant like that. And then, like we said before, understanding the limitations of the funder. Also, there's usually a spot to talk about budget notes. So in the application, whether it's on kind of the budget document itself or if it's a question in the proposal, it will ask you to explain, like, you know, what is this for? And then you can kind of break down, you know, we're asking for this amount total, it's gonna cover this, this, and this, and here's kind of why we need this. Getting as specific as you can is really going to help make your application strong. And then also, as we've kind of been alluding to, check with your school on their policies to make sure you have kind of the appropriate sign-offs ready to go, that you know how grant payments will be received or distributed, that you understand the purchase order process. You want to, you want the hardest part of fundraising to be the writing of the grant, and as opposed to like then trying to manage this or play catch up afterwards if you skipped a step or something like that. So working with your administrators and letting them know, hey, I'm applying for this thing. What do I need to know, or what do I need to do on my end with you to make sure that this goes smoothly once we get this funding? And so having those conversations up front will be really helpful in just like a smoother grant management process. And then last, keeping your receipts for grant reporting. Like Frank was saying, almost every grant funder will ask you to report back on your progress, and some folks will want like a budget to actuals. And so being able to say, you know, some of our sample examples, if we're doing a field trip, this is how much we think things are going to cost. Then being able to, when it's reporting time, come back to say, you know, we thought busing was going to cost $950. Because of X, Y, or Z, it actually cost, you know, $500. We got, you know, something was donated or something like that to help us bring that cost down. So understanding or being able to show kind of what you thought you were going to spend versus what you actually spent is going to make for a strong grant report when it's time to share that out.
And it's important too, because like if you don't, or like you don't do that, the chances of you getting more funding is like,
You have to give the surplus back?
Some funders do. And so if if you write a proposal for $5,000 and then for some reason you're only able to spend $2,000 of it, that might be an instance where they're like, okay, can we have that back if there are certain kind of outstanding reasons. If you can show like, you know, hey, we did X, Y, and Z, and you know, we're trying to spend this in good faith, then it's sort of a different conversation. But at that point, there's usually a representative at the organization that you're working with, and you can kind of have those conversations with them, and then having conversations along the way can also be really helpful, keeping folks up to date to be like, hey, you know, we're gearing up for this field trip, and here's what we're seeing. It looks like this number is going to come in under. And they might be like, cool, that's great. We love it when things come in under budget. Or they might be like, okay, well, you know, you said you were going to spend $2,000, so what are some other things you could spend that money on? So there's always opportunities to kind of pivot as long as you're having those conversations with your funding person.
On capital outlay, the state expects you to spend it all.
Yes.
All right. Sorry, I was going to say something about this, but I see hands. Oh, still.
One other heads up, and you know, if you're checking grants and looking at those, there are matching grants as well, which does obligate the district or the entity that you're granting to fund that portion of the grant. So particularly in districts, there are some districts that will not allow matching grants, and so you've got to be very careful as you look at the stipulations in those grants.
That's a good point.
What does that mean?
And so a matching grant is if a funder gives you $5,000, they might say, we're going to give you $5,000, but you need to either chip in your own $5,000 or have another funder provide it. So if the funder doesn't want to be kind of like the sole funder in the pool, they might have a matching grant ratio. So typically it's like a 1-to-1. So if we give you $5K, someone else needs to give you an additional $5K. Sometimes it's a 1-to-2. So if we give you 5, or a 2-to-1. You know, if we give you 5, we want you to raise another $2,500. Just something to a lot of times that's to help kind of build your philanthropic network, and it can help a funder feel like the program is perhaps more sustainable if there's other funders in the pool. So that might be something that you see. Thank you for bringing up batch grades.
It is no longer relevant.
We got one more question. Carolyn?
So I'm not a strong writer, but I've applied for a couple grants this year using ChatGPT, because I kind of like type into it and then I use it and then I like rephrase some stuff. Do you think people can tell? Am I gonna get like kicked out? I mean, I'm sure this is a different conversation for like a whole presentation. And if we want to skip it, that's fine. I just keep going.
I'll say just like kind of quick and high level, I feel like it's a good jumping off point. And if you want like a template and kind of like something to help you get started, that's good. But ChatGPT does not know your classes like you do. So then take that moment to build on it, make it more specific, and really kind of add those personal touches that will help the funder understand your work.
Yeah, I think tread lightly. You know, you guys can all recognize probably when something is AI written typically. So, you know, some funders might look at that and say, okay, and others might toss it out, like you said. So.
So this is when we would come back to our executive summary. Like once you've gotten those main things, I think that's when you can go back and you can write it. For the sake of time, I'm not going to have us like completely write this, but we did give you a little like kind of formula for it. So you can go back to this slide and say like, we're doing this project in this amount at this school. It doesn't have to look like this, but at least this is a jumping off point too.
So we would say, like, using our projects here, you know, the foundation support of our DJ equipment in the amount of $5,000 will allow the music teachers at the Modern Band School to purchase or provide, you know, DJ equipment, sound booth, recording gear, cables, to impact, you know, 100 students in expanding our DJ program, and kind of using that sort of Mad Lib style to plug in the what, the why, the who, and the how much. Okay, so now that we have sort of the nuts and bolts of our project built out, it's time for some writing tips and tricks, and this kind of plays into our ChatGPT section as well. So one of the best sort of things to keep in mind is just assuming that the grant leader knows nothing about your field. A lot of times grant panelists are made up of volunteers from across a wide variety of experiences. In some cases, if it's a small family foundation or something, the grant board or the people reading the grants are just members of the family. So you really don't know what folks' kind of professional backgrounds are. And so you want to make things as simple as possible. To give you another possibly Albert Einstein quote, if you can't explain it to a 6-year-old, you don't know it well enough. So really breaking down your work as simply as possible. And one of the biggest things are breaking down abbreviations. Folks outside of the music field might not know what an MEA is, so specify that it's the Music Educators Association. Always spell it out the first time, and then you can put the abbreviation in parentheses, so that they know the next time they see this, this is what this means. So breaking down abbreviations, and then also giving a little bit of context to field-specific topics. So, you know, folks might not know what things, what something like ORF is. So you might need to break down, you know, hey, ORF is a play-based form of music instruction. And this is an opportunity as well to leverage those funder priorities. So if we were writing something for that orchestral grant, if there's a certain methodology that you're using and you can be like, hey, this is tied to orchestra, that's a great way to kind of, again, bring everything back to those funder priorities. So then also just using clear and concise language. Again, the idea here is simplicity. So getting very grammatical, using active versus passive voice. Active voice is much more direct. And the way you can tell if you're slipping into passive voice is if you can insert the phrase by zombies at the end of your sentence. And if you can, then you're writing in passive voice. So for instance, if you said, the program will be implemented by zombies, that's passive voice. You want the person who's doing the thing to be leading your sentence. So for our team, we might say, you know, our teaching and learning team will implement the program. there are no zombies involved. Try to keep the zombies out of your
Dead zone.
Yes. So you can kind of do that test with yourself. Usually if there's that space for zombies, you want to cut that out.
I got I know there's question period after, but I get intimidated when I write grants because of that. But that's very, very helpful. But the intimidation comes because of, oh, am I doing this correctly? They need a coach to help me out and just proofread and, that's how I form my grants.
Yeah.
Just thought.
Call on those English teachers, you got connections at school.
And for real though, like asking a friend or colleague to read your work, hit up your English teachers, hit up your reading teachers, hit up your friends who are outside of your field and be like, does this make sense to you? And if they're like, yes.
I mean, even just between the three of us, we read each other's work multiple times per week. So, and it may cycle through one or two of us. It might cycle through all three of us before it goes out. But that proofreading process is so important because, even if you've put in the time to proofread your own things, there's a high chance that, you still looked over it as opposed to someone else is going to look at it with a fresh set of eyes and pick up something that you totally missed 3 times.
And reading your work out loud as well also changes your relationship to the text. Read work on a screen and then print it. Reading work on paper also changes your relationship to text, and the more you do that, the more you'll see, you'll just kind of catch errors. While there will always be typos no matter how many times you proofread things, the more professional you can make your work look, it really shows to the grant funder that you put a lot of effort into this and that you're serious about this program. Because if you send in a sloppy grant, you might be sloppy in running the program, and it can take away some trust. So doing your proofreading, and like Krista said before, be mindful of your character counts and your word counts. Follow their limits and keep those to the guidelines. Cool. So now
Do you kind of want to expedite a little bit because we are going to be short on time here? I'm wondering if we can kind of show the project template because we kind of set something up to get you started and formatting your own ideas if you're looking to write a grant in the next year. But I don't know that we're going to have time for that, and I kind of want to wrap the ends too. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So can I just talk briefly about what's on here?
Yeah, if you or click forward and they can see the other resources we have available too.
This QR code
Where'd it go?
is a link to this document. It's actually a little bit more detailed because we're going to fit this on a couple pages. And but it will force you to make a copy that will go to your drive. So if it says make a copy of this, just click that. And this is basically, that whole process that we worked through with this when we were asking you guiding questions, it's that. It's just a document that you can use to fill out, or just to brainstorm, what are the main things that I need to know before I start writing. So what we're gonna do is have you be able to talk to each other and actually kind of talk about what you could do for your own classroom. But I think we kind of need to wrap it up quickly here. But this is something that you can use with colleagues. You can make copies of it to be able to brainstorm some things.
Thank you. And again, while this is not necessarily a grant proposal, answering the questions kind of in this document or in this template before you sit down and start writing will help you have a really clear idea of your project, and it will make writing a lot easier because you'll have a lot of those questions answered. And so then you can take information that's here and just kind of repurpose it to match the questions that they're asking.
We're kind of just going to wrap with a few tips and tricks, and we do have some resources included in here, but it is so important that if you receive money from someone, you receive items from someone, to thank your funder. The value of a thank you goes a long way, and someone mentioned being funded multiple times because a lot of these, whether it's people, whether it's foundation, whether it's a company, they may give you $1,000 every year, and you might just kind of get on a recurring basis with them where they hand you $1,000, you send them a little report about what you've done, slap in a picture or video, and that's amazing. But thanking is so important. We spend a lot of time doing this with some of our funders, and it's just deliver it based on the recipient's preference. This doesn't mean you need to go out writing thank you cards or buying a big stack of thank you cards. Oftentimes an email is enough, just really something authentic to demonstrate, like, you know, here's what we've done, here's why we're grateful, we so appreciate what you've been able to give to me in my school. So it goes a long way.
Yeah, and just building off of that too, if there's opportunities to engage with your funders, use them. So if you're getting some funding from the local Rotary Club, a lot of times there'll be opportunities for funders to get together with the donors. There'll be like a luncheons or things like that, especially for very local funders. And so go to those. If you can show your support in person and meet kind of the folks who are the decision makers, that goes such a long way. And invite funders to your events. Do you have a concert that's going to be using some of the donated equipment? Like, say, hey, this is when our spring concert is. Come on out. We would love for members of our Rotary Club to come and see the show and see their impact in person. So finding opportunities to build that connection with the funders also goes a really long way in developing that relationship.
So kind of just a little sample for you. Formal greetings, great. Address them by their name and title. Just an expression of sincere gratitude again. Give them an overview of your project, what you've been able to implement, maybe what you're planning to do long term as well. Offer to keep them updated, and include some photos or videos if it's available. I've talked to some of you in this room about that this week. We love to see videos from folks that we work with. I know Olympia, you've participated with us, sending us videos for masterclass, and maybe some of the other folks here have as well. So funders love to see that. They need to see things in action, so get videos of your kids and send them.
And then onto tracking and recording. So kind of like what Krista was saying, you want to make sure that you are tracking your outcomes along the way. And so if we take a look at our next slide, these are some of the things that you want to take into consideration. And a lot of these you want to take into consideration before you even apply for the grant. Take a look at the timeline. You know, is the report going to be due, once a year? Is it going to be due once a quarter? Things like that will help you understand if you have the bandwidth to really kind of support and implement the grant. So knowing that beforehand is really key. Understanding the metrics that you're reporting against. So you almost want to take, when you're looking at the evaluations that you're setting forth in your proposal, you want to be able to compare exactly that. Like if you said, we're going to expand the program to 100 kids, by the end of the period, you need to be able to say, we exceeded our goals. We expanded our program by 125 kids. And so being able to track kind of one for one what you said you're going to track in the proposal, you want to make sure that you have the processes in place to track that information so that you're ready to go for reporting time. And then finally, also understanding the reporting type. Kind of like Krista was saying, do they want, a 1 to 2 page PDF that just outlines what you've accomplished this year? Do they want like a very detailed breakdown in their own grant portal with a lot of questions? Again, all of this and kind of understanding this before you start the application will help you understand and just make sure that you have the bandwidth to support the grant as it goes on. Next is also identifying who else you need to work with to get this information and make sure that the project happens. So for your team, if you have other people that you're going to be working with, making sure that everybody's on board. If you're like a lead teacher and there's a few other folks who will be affected by this project, being like, hey, this is something that we're planning on doing. Like, are we all on board together to implement this? In Music Will, like the fundraising team should not ever go to the program team to be like, hey, we just got this money to do this thing that you did not ask for, because then they have to go out of their way to put together a project that is maybe not something that they have the bandwidth for. So making sure that if you have other stakeholders involved, everybody is on the same page. You know who you need to go to for information, and who else will be affected by the project. Don't grant write in a vacuum. And then tracking your progress as you go, using the benchmarks that you've established, and again, kind of continuing to meet with the folks that you're working with to be like, okay, if we said we were going to expand the whole music program by this amount, you're meeting with other folks on your team to say, I'm not just the only one tracking this, making sure that the other folks that your grant is impacting are keeping track of those metrics as well. And then leveraging those qualitative and quantitative evaluations to really be able to tell the full story of the impact that project has had.
So I put together just a few resources that are out there that are on this slide, and you can go back to, they're all linked there. But that project planning template, that was the paper that I gave you, that's also that QR code link. So if you're having trouble with the QR code link, there's like a direct link in here. Some writing resources, so if you like kind of want to go back to some of the things we talked about today, these other resources are there for you, especially that strengths-based language was like the thing where we looked at the example and said like, hey, this is kind of yucky, this is more positive, and looking into the nuances of that. Some grants, search engines that are good to use, and some advocacy resources in case you want to use data about what the impact of music education is. And what like has been proven in research studies. So now we have some time for questions. I know that like you guys have been sitting here for a long time listening to us talk, and it's been a very long day and a long conference, and it's hard to do that. So like super appreciate you engaging with us and asking questions. The link that's here is just the same one from the beginning, if you were here at the beginning, by the way. But we can have some time for questions. And also our emails are up there if you do have like further questions about some of the things that we talked about, or we need to clarify something, totally fine to reach out as well. Yes?
If you are asking for money as opposed to stuff, is it appropriate to, in your proposal, like, have links to things so that they can actually see the cost, or is that weird and bad? I don't know.
It depends. Like sometimes if it's in a grant portal, a link that's embedded, you know, like that is like embedded with it, it won't work. But if you spell out the link, they can copy and paste it. Some funders even say like don't include links, or do include links, or make sure your links are on a PDF for like,
Great.
yeah.
Sometimes
So,
when it comes down to like specific items, like I think I was talking earlier about writing the one for books, I literally like what they had requested was just like a full laid out budget of what you wanted. So I literally went with like book title, went to Amazon, saw it was $29.99. This book, $29.99. This item, $35. This. So they don't always want a link to see the
They don't wanna,
physical
like, throw
thing,
that extra
but just like a straight up lineup. I want the DJ thing, it costs $10,000. I want this, it costs this.
And getting really specific too, like if you, you know, it's like I don't just want a bass, I want this Epiphone model number, so that you know
Definitely.
they'll take a look and do their due diligence.
Yep.
So just kind of getting them as much information as possible in that line item budget.
And it adds to your credibility too. It's like, ooh, they know what they're
Yes.
talking about.
Just the discussion about links made me think, just in this digital age, submitting a grant proposal digitally through the email is completely acceptable as opposed to
Totally normal.
totally normal.
Some could be a Google form, could request it via email. They might have some type of portal that you log into, like their own personal thing, and you submit through there.
Some of our funders are still on snail mail.
Occasionally, someone might want just a letter in the mail, so.
But that'll all be laid out in those funder guidelines. So when you're looking for a funder, that's like one of the first things that they'll say is how to submit the grant. And so you might see, like Krista was saying, there'll be a link to where to send it, there'll be an email address. You should, I don't think there's a situation where you'll be left kind of guessing how should I send this to them.
Is it better to make it, when you're describing your project, make it shorter and concise rather than 2 or 3 paragraphs?
If you can keep it short and sweet, keep it short and sweet, but don't sacrifice like content for the sake of being concise. Like we said, assume that the funder does not know a lot about your work, and so take the space that you need to, you know, give them a full picture without going kind of over the word count. So there's definitely that's the finding that sweet spot is I think kind of the key to writing a good grant, and that might take a little trial and error and a little practice, and that's why having some trusted folks that you can go to for help with proofreading, and kind of just getting some feedback on is going to be really helpful when you're first starting out writing your grant.
And even when you're drafting, like, it's okay to not worry about that, and then you can go back and like really condense.
Yes, we call it on our team is like putting sand in the sandbox. So we'll start off by being like, okay, this is everything I want to make sure I say, and you fill up the Word document, you go way, way, way over the word count, and then as you start to refine your thoughts, you kind of cut stuff down. It is impossible to edit a blank page, so you've got to get your words down first, and then you can trim and revise. But you gotta start somewhere, so don't be afraid of overwriting and then kind of trimming it down.
Oh, and also too, it was like if you run into grants that maybe don't, their eligibility isn't 6 months down the road, set a calendar reminder.
Yes.
I won't forget. Next
We
year
do
for
that
the same
too.
time. So,
And put your
Great tip.
deadline like
Yep.
2 weeks ahead,
Yeah.
so you have the time to go back and revise and check word counts, and change words, and
A good funding source that I've gotten was quite a few grants is our state social studies, because we have a lot of tie-ins.
Ah.
So that's a resource. It's really good. And also funds for teachers, if you've been the last 5 years, they're paying for me this week.
Amazing.
The Innovation Circle, because they're talking about student-centered.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't think Fun for Teachers would send people out here for
Yeah.
us.
Yeah.
Well,
Love
you can
that.
design your own professional development.
Yeah.
So if you want to like write it to come back to the summit, and it can include other things too. Maybe there's another like popular music workshop in your area or something like
Yeah, because you
that.
can only get funds to teacher every 5 years, so innovation
Yes.
you can get
It's amazing.
every, yeah.
Mhm.
What's that called?
It's the fund for teachers.
Fund
All right.
for
One time
teachers.
single, it's fun after that.
All right.
Add them to our list.
If you guys think of anything else, seriously, hit us up via email. We're happy to reply and answer any other questions. Thank you so much for being here. We're wrapping it up here, you guys. So